It's June 15th, 2022. My son came home with two things in his bag. One, he came home with, they just gave the kids a Civil Wars test. He got a 90. Woohoo. And then he came home with something called, one of the kids in his class created a story, supposedly. It says, in the life of an eraser was the cover. Then on the back, it said that the eraser was made out of rubber. Rubber being an R, and the word RUbbER with two B's. And it said that the erasers didn't know what was going to come next. I don't know if this is a message of like we're both in the same boat. I don't know. Yesterday also, this is the Union Jack. Yesterday I was walking on the street, just so here in the great beyond is aware, and there was a child from not RH negative, let's just say, by ABO standards, but he is one of the local children. He's one of the locals that actually, he's probably the only real interactive feature that I have where, if you want to, like, if you're going to say spiritual worker, perhaps, and the child's just built and wired differently than the rest of the children in the school, and this one is allowed to speak with me. I don't know why. I kept my sunglasses on, so there was no eye contact, like, problem. He came up on the street. He was walking with his family. He had a happy birthday balloon for himself. He came running down the street, and he wrapped his arms around me, gave me embrace, perhaps, is a better word than whatever, being that the heart is whatever I described it as yesterday. So he wrapped his arms around my legs and gave me an embrace, and he said, "You are everywhere." And then he announced to his whole family that I was the blue fairy from Pinocchio. I mean, this is how the child chooses to recognize me. So in this setting, and on the cover of this this classmate of my son's, the eraser had a little bubble, like a comic, that said, "I'm disappearing." So at Uber with two B's, and not quoting inflation or inflation, I'm really unclear how to handle this. Then, so again, I said, "You're my biggest fan" to the little boy last night. I thanked his parents, and then I kept on walking, again, dressed in my whatever, just trying to, all one, no emblems, just trying to stay, I suppose, fluid or in humor, being like moving around the energy field, even though it hurts like anything. And I don't know what is the causation of or the source of the pain at the moment. So, and then this morning, I turn on CBS this morning, and there is a message from two generals. Now, this was interesting. I thought it was an interesting message. I listened to it with a very intent ear, only because the generals that I see there are so they're on the television. Like, there's none that I'm aware of that look as familial in the local area. It's a completely different set of circumstances in New York at the moment, and I'm not quite sure what's going on at general level, even though we're the public or the private public. I don't even know how to equate that in language. Also, today on the CBS, there was a message from a dark messenger who called himself Sinclair. Now, this gets confusing because he's speaking of, now in my life frame, gas used to be like when I was in the 90s, early 90s, gas was at $0.99. That was 19th century, late 19th century, almost into early 20th century. Now in 20th century, the national number for today, being June 15th that they displayed, was $5.01. What I don't understand is where the metric goes. Is it fueling the Mick machine? Is it CMIC? Is it my Mick? Is it someone else's Mick? Where is this at the U.S. Patent Office and like the business office of, there's some real serious problems between nuts and knots, with shipping and trade-off, and then knockoffs. But this Sinclair, now, to my understanding of French things and Red Crosses, there was something to do with the Crusades in a historical, I think it was BBC who put it out. It was Britain who put it out, and they had a British Frenchman, who they said was part of this crusades. He called himself Sinclair. There was like a whole, but I mean, like, again, is that today in America, in New York, they make it sound like British is only London. But Brittany, I know, is in France. So this, again, I don't want to question things. I don't want to be snarky or whatever, but it is very confusing when I'm amongst not even British or Brittany people or persons. I'm amongst something else totally different that on visual contact and first inspection one can see that we're not of the same blood type. I mean, there are parts of the population where it gets confusing. You just don't know. Like ultra-terrestrial, but there are some very real serious situations I walk into, and I'm like, no, I know that in blood brothers and blood kinship and dry humor, we're not the same. So the Sinclair that Brittany and British London looking in this crusades looks more like the two generals that they're showing this morning, according to the historical reference that they put out to have a baseline of one theoretical truth in faction, where it becomes, I don't know what they're using the preposition de for in de facto, if that's a divide in the faction, but that would be what they're displaying on CBS this morning, because they have a man that goes by this name Sinclair, but he's not British Crown Standard nor Brittany, according to what has been taught within this world or this part of kingdom, in some form of unity construct. And in this particular part and section where I am in New York, I've been hit with temporal paralysis by some outside source. I have looked. There is some FCC tower project that went on before I arrived in 1978. There's been some big music and television and production grab. So I don't know if that interferes with the airwaves. And then there's a microwave frequency that happens at like a gamma level that turns benign radio waves into really serious danger convection waves of sorts, just for have words of fright, for how serious it's been that I've been able to learn. It might not be the ISO, the industry standard at upper educated, but for my ability to obtain words that are used in the physics field and knowing and studying in a college setting with a set standard of metric words for life science, that I've accomplished, and for medical microbiota. They also mentioned something last night about mRNA, and I'm like, oh my God, why was that taught at such a broad spectrum? I mean, alarm bells go off with now they have the ability to create disease just to then come in and push it off and have people cure the disease, but now somebody's in control of whether you live or die at such a nanotech that's even more frightening, because now like gas prices are no longer 99 cents, they're now at $5.01. Where's that money going? Is it paying the extortion artists, which hold your genetics with a microwave ability to turn genetic cancers on and off in radiation, because then they put you through radiation therapy and they change the frequency? I mean, it's a frightening world sitting here right now, and not having a single handhold and not having a single person actually come through with a long-term cure to where they've left me at working poor and now unemployed completely. And when the machine of environmental turns off in things that are not known to the whatever, it is easier to choose and pull out the minority being Rh negative and not of O, somewhere in an AB category, which I'm not giving further whatever, rather than the majority as a benchmark and ability to follow star charts. and where in the larger system there are things being exploited or taken advantage of and harmed, that then goes to a greater existential wave of problems that then affect the majority of the ABOs.
As the January 6th hearings highlight our nation's political divisions, several former military leaders, including retired Army General Stanley McChrystal and Army General Doug Lute, are urging Americans to recommit to this country's core principles. They're part of a group called Team Democracy that wants people to pledge that elections are conducted according to the rule of law without partisan bias. The general spoke with senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge about the new initiative and why they believe our democracy faces its greatest threat.
Now, whatever his real name is, whatever his really goes by, and however it changes within my mention pieces, I'm assuming that he knows where he falls inside of, and that's all that matters between, but I mean, again, meeting someone by the name of Thomas Jefferson, knowing that Thomas Jefferson is still alive, still exists, as an ancestor, descendant, antecedent, whatever. He's in the story of America, being North America, and he really exists. Having further spent time as, let's just call it ultra-terrestrial or extraterrestrial to his whatever, and knowing he exists. And do aliens exist? Yeah, they do. And we're few and far between. But he has the ability to appear when it's safe and on his schedule. I'm stuck in the field and almost at effect of whatever the others are doing. I don't know how to get out of this. There's no, like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and put your life back together. I haven't been able to do that since I was 5. So I'm not exactly clear on where in humanity I'm supposed to be useful and helpful as a resource when I'm so stuck by somebody else's design, somebody else's intellectual design.
The Civil War.
I actually think that this is as dangerous a time as we've seen in our lifetime.
Retired Army General Stanley McChrystal, who once led U.S. forces around the globe, including Afghanistan, sees America's current divisions as an issue of national security.
Because you see the symptoms of people who are disassociated from the legitimacy of the government. They are starting to question basic things like, was an election outcome valid?
I'm beginning to see, as Stan suggested, these fissures.
Retired Lieutenant General Doug Lute also served globally over a 4-decade career, including as U.S. ambassador to NATO.
These tiny fractures, these small fractures that, because of our international experience, we understand can widen and can divide America. It can actually present opportunities for our opponents.
It's not every day that you have 2 retired generals sit down and talk about the state of our elections. Why are you coming forward?
Our enemies would like nothing more than to find us not unified, to find us fragmented and unable to be the kind of America that they have faced before or relied on if they're allies.
I think Stan and I have seen democracies, fledgling democracies overseas, struggle to find their feet. And at least for me, I see some of those warning signs today in America.
As seasoned observers of conflict, these generals joined Team Democracy to highlight core principles.
The idea is to give every American a reminder and a commitment that safe and fair elections are fundamental to our nation and democracy.
The election was rigged, it was stolen.
Without the backing of former President Trump and his supporters, how can this work?
Well, it starts with the grassroots movement. Every American has got to step back and say, what do I really believe in about our nation? And that is that we are a democracy. What signals that? The fact that I believe and participate in the elections.
The thing that unites us is that before we were supporters of President Trump or President Biden or Obama, we were Americans. We are Americans.
Fearful of America's military superiority, these generals say our adversaries use information as a weapon to mislead, confuse, and divide.
If I were an adversary of the United States, I want to go after two things. First would be our political unity, our ability to make unified decisions and execute things. But I'd also want to go after our legitimacy as a nation that other nations want to emulate.
From an intelligence perspective, why are Americans so divided?
When people get messages that are very direct and often they are either intentionally or unintentionally incorrect, it changes their beliefs. And so they start to hold fundamental ideas that are contrary to facts.
It actually opens opportunities for those who would do us harm. And eventually their aim is to make us so divided that we're internally consumed, we're self-absorbed with our own problems, and we're unable to address issues overseas.
Recent CBS News polling underscores the divisions, with most Americans expecting violence.
That's interesting, because while there are some representatives overseas in other, whatever they call them over there, there's been some underground railroad going on of cross migration. I have no idea where to report it, where to raise a hand. Is it safe? Is it not? How do you tell the difference? I mean, again, I know there's important people in the world. I just have no idea where they gather. I have no idea how to support them. I have no idea which ones are safe and which ones are trying to purposely hurt me. And then I have children in the field. So this gets even more frightening. Here's Anthony, and there's the Civil War test. And this was and then there's this, and then this. So it adds up. But that's from the local school that's still teaching about the Civil War. Was also teaching about the unrest in the American colonies, and was also teaching about the American Revolutionary War in a baseline of words and facts that are congruent amongst the spectrum, just to have something to fall back on as a reference, depending on where and what is going on in the real world section.
Violence after future presidential elections.
This is not the America that we've come to expect of ourselves.
I think if we look in cases where people think violence is an option or even an obligation, then we are starting to have drifted somewhere that we see in other countries far away, but it's suddenly come home, and we need to pay close attention to it.
And once that drift begins, it's very difficult to reverse it. So now is the time, as a preventive measure, we need to get in front of these divides and try to cement ourselves back together.
The generals have not announced a complete plan of action yet, but believe asking people from across the political spectrum to recommit to core democratic principles is a good starting point. And the group cites research that public pledges can drive behavior, especially when paired with public accountability efforts. Michelle.
The nation is at stake, Catherine. Thank you. Well, coming up, Serena Williams.
So that was that. Let me put up the Sinclair reference. That does not look like what was brought forward as a Knights of Templar crusader for the Brittany and British, according to BBC. They looked like the two generals that were just on when they cast characters to put some pantomime of an older day or like old world historical reference, the visual acuity was different than the person who's now being portrayed today in this 20th century, 22nd year in New York. The name now is being visually associated with something that's not what was agreed upon in televised other areas for other reasons, and then becomes this little fissure, like the general said, that's out there that then causes, or the potential for miscommunication and misalignment and larger problems the longer it goes on, and then gets recast or characterized in the wrong way in such a discreet way. I mean, it's
To the gas station, gas prices depend on factors far from America's borders. So what really goes into the price you're paying at the pump? Errol Barnett explains.
now there's some consumers, the burden of disease being consumption, and what the public is actually thinking, just because we haven't been educated at the level of kings and generals. We're just the commoners, so we got common level educations. Gas was not part of it. Trying to figure out where the taxes in gas go or being used or appropriated, or how that works, was not part of our education, at least in the time frame and the classes I stepped into. I don't know if it was being addressed in other more advanced parent to child relationships in this socially misengineered project.
I pay $175 to fill up this car.
That was half a tank. A little more than $64 for half a tank.
We all know that feeling of pain at the pump.
And you don't even know why.
But what you may not know is what exactly determines the price of fuel.
The supply and demand.
Inflation all around, the war.
Taxes. I don't quite understand the whole economics behind it.
That is the truth of most of like my life. Like, what does it mean? Like, I get it, you pay for a product, a tangible good, but it can't possibly have cost only 99 cents for someone to make a profit and to make the world go round in the 90s. What increased so substantially to $5.01 within 20 years? I mean, per gallon, just so galleon of shipping and containment, because that's in there somewhere, and then pirates and nuts and knots and all other things that I don't have access nor benefited from. I mean, what's fueling what? Oh, that's a good question.
What makes up the bulk of the prices we see posted?
Oh, without a doubt, it's crude oil. And crude oil.
Okay, so now, general public, it's not getting a general's education. They're getting common level peasant education. At worst, that's what they get. I mean, it's like they get some kind of language and vocabulary, but it doesn't build anything while they're in school. So they're already put at a disadvantage through some intelligent design of I don't know whose country. And then there's a spokesperson calling himself a Sinclair And now all of a sudden he's in charge of this AAA Northeast Senior Manager Public Affairs. Seems really official. Except the messenger system's all wrong. It's not what London, Britain, and Brittany in somewhere else and Crusaders speak of great beyond European. It's not what they have portrayed in their invented history, their agreed upon platform of scholars and scholarly. It's now being represented by I don't know what. And it's completely dissident. But it's performing on this light feature, pushing somebody else's agenda that I don't know, and I have no way of verifying if my level or my safety feature of genetic security knows that this is going on regularly, confusing the masses.
Globally priced commodity.
Robert Sinclair is a spokesperson for AAA. He says there are four main contributors to the price of gas: taxes, distribution and marketing, and refining.
Now, they spell galleon differently. They sell it by a gallon. But I know on somebody's spreadsheet or whatever, they have a mention in Harry Potter. It goes like sickles and newts. So, I mean, again, these go back to the goddess Newt trying to hold up the sky. And then there's some sailing component of it. I mean, it's really important.
All playing a key role, but roughly 2/3 of what you pay is based on the price of crude oil, which itself is up 70% from last year. American oil companies lead the world in oil production, but we still consume far more than we make. Saudi Arabia is second in production, and Russia a very close third.
Russia was and is a major producer, so you take 10% off the market, suddenly everybody is scrambling for that higher value, higher price.
What's the next major contributor?
Probably refining costs is the next major contributor.
Now, this man has a title, has some form of salary, some form of pension, some form of way of contributing and participating inside of the U.S. I haven't been given the same opportunity. I've been in some working poor class just trying to trade time for money so I can afford myself clothes and so on and so forth, not having to steal from others, but here we are. Not quite sure how the system got broke this way. There's a whole lot of people who educated themselves in guessing or following somebody's wrong theory.
Refineries are not distributed evenly across the country. You'll find lower gas prices in southern states where there are more refineries. As you head west, there are fewer.
In California, you have to drive, and thus the gasoline there is more valuable, and with very few refineries, it's going to be more expensive.
Sinclair said.
So now they're pushing refineries, so there's some form of land control, some form of land lease, somebody else's agenda again. More integrated problems that have never really been addressed in the way that need be for sustainability.
It says as long as the war in Ukraine rages, prices will continue to rise. So one gas station in Minnesota is trying to find some humor in the situation.
Try to show empathy to your customers when the little Toyota Corolla gets fuel and it's $80. You kind of, know how much it hits home to people.
And is this research? Is this bipartisan? I have no idea. I mean, in my local walkabouts and in my local area, they don't even teach those things. I had to hear that on the radio as like a side note that one of the professional uses, but I have no way of knowing what he uses it for.
Now, you may remember some states instituted gas tax holidays, which suspend the tax for a short amount of time. President Biden said he's considering that on the federal level, but energy experts say they're just not enough to offset this increasing price in oil, Michelle. And if there's any hurricane that disrupts production in the Gulf, experts say you can expect prices to kick even higher.
And the storms will surely kick up this season. Errol, thank you so much. Well, now to the latest on that framework deal for gun reform in Washington, which just got some major help on the Republican side. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says he's
It's star 1978. Oh, there's one other gentleman I wanted to put on.
Lowering the cost of childcare and prescription drugs. But Republicans argue pandemic-era stimulus is already contributing to inflation, and they don't want to spend more.
Washington Democrats have been wrong about inflation from the very beginning. Notwithstanding our efforts to try and convince them that pushing $2 trillion out into the economy was going to be inflationary and create lots of havoc in our economy, they went ahead and did it anyway.
As the country struggles with record high gas prices, the White House is now making it official. President Biden will be heading to oil-rich Saudi Arabia next month. Now, this is a big shift for President Biden, who said during the campaign that he would seek to make the crown prince of the Saudi kingdom a, quote, pariah over human rights abuses. But now the White House says, Nate, he'll go wherever he has to go if it's in the nation's interest.
Nancy, thank you. From inflation to the gas station.
It's star 1978, star 8378, Nicole, Cattaruzza, it's Earth, Solar System, Milky Way, Universe, Galaxy is broken. And again, at ACE scores, ACE, and then the heliosphere, a collapsing part of the universe, dark matter in a black hole scenario where kelvins can be measured, and that sort of responsibility, which is rarely seen or spoken of, but in my instance is just an umbrella and handle at the moment. Because I've heard lately a lot, you can't stop the rain. So, an umbrella and a handle. It's June 15th, 2022.